Tell me, what is low equilibrium trap?
The local self-governments don't have enough money to make their own.
Okay. The local self-governments depend on central government, right? Central government and the state government.
That money comes here not for Christmas.
Yes. So whatever money they get, right, is mostly from these two, tiers of the government, right? And it is mostly earmarked for whatever purposes it is, right? Which was the next chapter we were about to start? Okay, tell me what is the meaning of that? What is the meaning of it? I asked you to look into it, right? What is the meaning? Dekha na? You did not look into it. Good. Is there a late convergence stall? Is there a late convergence stall in economic development? Can India escape it? This is the name of the chapter, right? So what is this all about? What is this all about? So convergence process, how is it going on? Right? Convergence process, how is it going on? What convergence process? The poorer countries closing gaps with richer countries in standard of living. So the convergence part we are talking about is the poorer countries' efforts to close gaps with developed countries in standard of living. That's what convergence is all about. Right? For the last 20-30 years, 2 to 3 decades, this gap has been broadening and accelerating. Right? So for the last 2-3 decades, क्या हो रहा है? This process has been what? Widening and accelerating. So India is a developing country which is also trying to close this gap, right? There is a standard of living for the developed countries, there is a standard of living for India, right? We are trying to do what? Close this gap, but this gap is widening, right? So what has happened? It has come to a stall, late convergence stall, right? It is not moving further up, right? The gap is not narrowing, right? So what should we do to deal with this, right? What should we do to deal with this? So there are certain challenges that can potentially slow down the process of convergence for the low middle income countries. Right? So what are low middle income countries? Right? So India also has certain lessons. So the survey talks about 4 categories of economies. It talks about 4 categories of economies. हमारा कौन सा है? Lower middle income category. So the first category it speaks of is low income. First category is low income category. Right? Here the real per capita income is less than 5% of US. Less than 5% of that of US. Lower middle income, कितना है? 5 to 15% of that of US. Upper middle income, here it's from 15 to 35%. And finally, high income, all above what? 35% above, and some countries even with incomes higher than that of US. Right? Some countries will have per capita income higher than US. किस country का है highest per capita?
Liechtenstein. I mean, sorry, Luxembourg.
Luxembourg. It was Luxembourg, no? Okay. In the last few decades, the global goods which ensure essential services and well-being have improved drastically, especially among the poor countries. Right? What has happened is called economic convergence. Right? The poorer countries are trying to catch up with what? The developed countries by using these resources. जो भी improvements हुआ है goods में, global goods जो बोलते हैं हम, what are global goods? The global common goods, right? As also global goods in the sense which are traded globally. In goods mein there has been a significant improvement, right? And it has made life easier, and access to poorer countries has also become easier. So the poorer countries have been utilizing these goods, right? Global goods. They are able to lay hands on those cheap, efficient goods, and they are able to try to catch up with the richer countries, right? This is called economic convergence. This is a process which is going on, right? The poor countries have been trying so hard, right? The poorer countries have been trying so hard, and the improvement has been so rapid. You call it convergence with a vengeance. What is it called? Convergence with a vengeance. Why do we call it convergence with a vengeance? The poorer countries are improving so fast to catch up with the developed countries. Right? Rapid improvement हो रहा है. Right? So when we say broadening the gap, it means what? On most of the areas, on most of the fronts, the poorer countries are trying to catch up.
When the
Right?
gap will be reducing.
No. They are trying to catch up. Accelerate कर रहा है poorer countries. What about the rest of the countries? Middle income countries का क्या है? The problem is there is a threshold, no? While catching up, there is a threshold. For example, in your exams. So prelims में, right? Prelims score में or main score में, there is a point till which you can score easily. उस point के बाद बहुत मुश्किल हो जाता है, isn't it? See, out of 200 scoring till 100 is easier. That 100 to 105, right, or 110, that becomes difficult. So last year the cutoff was 98, right? So not so high, वैसे तो, right? The expectation is that there is a tendency for UPSC to, see to it that उसका भी face saving हो जाए, right? जैसे कि एग्जाम में बहुत कम मार्क्स आ रहा है ना लोगों को, it's not a good sign for UPSC also. So it should be above 100. So chances are that they are going to give a easier paper this time around, right? So this happened when they introduced the CSAT for the first time. When they introduced CSAT for the first time, I think the cutoff was somewhere around 175. That is for two papers put together, right? For both the papers put together, it was I think 175 or 185. I don't remember properly, right? But it was lesser. See, 200 normal है, out of 400, 200 normal है, 50% तो लाना है, UPSC एग्जाम है, right? पेपर में छापने के लिए भी अच्छा नहीं लगेगा, right? 200 तो लगना चाहिए. So what they did next year, they eased the difficulty of paper. So what happened after that? It has been about 200, right? When there were two papers. अब भी ऐसा ही होगा. So this time around it was 98. So they'll give a easier paper so that people at least score somewhere around 102 cut off के लिए, right? So and remember, if you are studying well, easy paper is a bad thing, right? If you have studied something, always wish for a difficult paper, very difficult paper actually. If you are prepared properly, always wish for a very difficult paper. If you are not prepared properly, wish for an easy paper. Right? Next. So following two trends, there are two trends which justify, to justify the broadening process. Two trends to justify the broadening process. There has been a substantial increase. In the number of poorer countries. Growing faster than advanced countries. What does this mean? Growth rate poorer countries का ज़्यादा है, right? The growth rate of poorer countries is faster than the richer countries, right? Second is obviously accelerated rate to catch up with the richer countries in the standard of living. So a lot many poorer countries are trying to catch up, right? And उनका growth rates भी ऊपर है richer countries. These are the two trends which have been observed, right? However, what is the problem? However, there could be a slowdown there could be a slowdown for the late convergence stall. There could be a slowdown for the late convergence stall due to four possible headwinds. Four possible headwinds. Headwinds, H-E-A-D-W-I-N-D-S. Four possible headwinds that were absent for the early convergers, like Japan and Korea. So this late converger, right, is getting stalled. That's the fear we have. Who is the late converger here? India. India is a late converger. So